Ladies and gentlemen, it is your man out of Japan, Jay Contra, here at the desk studio with the video that I was surprised that people requested. I didn't think that people would actually be interested in my reasons for leaving Japan. And I thought instead of just me talking into the camera, you've got to see my face for 15-20 minutes, why not go through the games that I brought with me to my new destination. And we can talk about the games. I'll talk about my reasons for leaving Japan. This is going to be a new weird type of video. Wow, I didn't know they actually did this for Pokemon Crystal. This is another one on my shame list that I've had for a while. You can tell here that the battery has been replaced because the original batteries in Game Boy cartridges do not have that sort of yellow ring. That's pretty common for what you'll find as a replacement battery. Wow, this is incredible. I can't believe I even found this when I did. The hard off that I bought this from usually has pretty high prices for its rare and sought after games. Although Pokemon Crystal isn't very rare, but it is very sought after. So why did I end up leaving Japan? Well, maybe I should start in the way back of the year 2019. It seems so long ago, doesn't it, that when I'm filming this, it's June, so that would have been about 9 months ago. So I was working at a Japanese university. I was doing a communications gig, and actually, when I look back on it, my life was pretty good at that point. The job, I wasn't making that much money, but I was doing okay. I could go on vacations, when I had the days. Not like I was going anywhere super expensive, but I could take some time off and I could go to some new places. But I'd been living on the island of Kyushu for, I think, at that point it was 6 years. And I'd been everywhere I wanted to go. My job was sort of frustrating me, and then it was just kind of the same thing. I'd been there for 2 years at that point. And I was like, maybe it's time for something new. So I really wanted to go to Tokyo. That was sort of my dream, was to find a job working with a Japanese company in Tokyo. And really, I guess if I want to make this video short and you just want to cut off now, be very careful what you wish for. So what I did was I spent the summer last year applying for jobs. I think I ended up applying to about 2 or 3 different jobs. Actually, I guess in total it was 4. Look at this Steel Empire. So this is actually these clear acrylic cases. It's like retro game protection. I can't remember the model or the maker of these, but these have really served me well in hauling these old video games across several continents now. So anyways, going back to it, I was applying to a bunch of different jobs. I ended up getting some interviews with a video game company or a mobile game producer to do PR, basically translate press releases and do some more marketing kinds of stuff. I applied to a couple different universities, got a few interviews there, but then I ended up going with the employer that I eventually ended up selecting and joining, and it was sort of the dream. It was exactly what you would want when you're a foreigner in Japan and you're looking to sort of get permanent residency, because it's what's called a seishain position. That means that you are a full member of the company. It's sort of that traditional Japanese salaryman. You're sort of in a sort of managerial role. The pay was, honestly, looking back on it, not that great, and I'll get into that in a little bit. I won't get into the specifics about the job, just because I did, I don't want to. I'm not going to badmouth the place, because I actually think it was a very fine place to work. I actually don't. There are a couple things that no place is going to be perfect, but the employer that I had, they really did. They did a lot of things right by me, but I think my bigger problems was sort of more personal, and then I think just a couple things separately. And I'll try and be just very careful. Not that I think anyone, no, I believe 0 of the people I work with have any interest in retro games, so I doubt they're going to find this channel. But I'll just be very careful with what I say. So another thing on the whole background was when I'm talking about when I got bored with my previous job, I also had just turned 30 last year. And for the younger people out there, I know most of the people here, I think like 25 to 35, according to the YouTube age bracket demographic reports that I get. But if you're sort of younger, if you're in college, if you're in your mid-20s, when you turn 30, I don't know what this is like for all the other sort of older people who watch this, but a switch kind of gets flipped, and when you see your friends having kids, they're getting married, and you're just kind of like floating through Japan, you just kind of get, I had this fire lit underneath me that it's like, okay, now's the time to sort of make things happen. And when you're in when you're a contract position in a Japanese organization, you're basically limited to working there for 5 years. Your pay's not going to be great. There's really no sort of system of promotion when you're at that point. And that's sort of really, I think, what got me looking for a different job. The only problem is that when I did find my supposed dream job in Tokyo, I ended up having to make a lot of sacrifices. I ended up spending a lot of money to move, although I think I did it actually rather cheaply. And I think the real big thing, I made a couple of sort of classic mistakes. You know, when I moved from my first job in Japan to my next job in Japan, I did it all myself. I had a car. I was able to sort of, just haul everything independently. And I was able to sort of keep most of my stuff and keep the same similar lifestyle. I was able to find a really decent apartment because I sort of knew I was able to, using the university, they were able to hook me up with a good real estate agent who then got me a great apartment. But then when I moved to Tokyo, when I actually moved to Yokohama, which is right next to Tokyo, I worked in Tokyo, but I commuted in. I didn't actually live in Tokyo, if you want to be super technical about it. But what happened was I ended up, I went online, I found some apartments that I wanted to live in. And for one, the apartments, in the price range that I was looking at, they were going to be small, but that was fine. I figured that was the price of city life. And the issue that I found was literally the first apartment that I applied to visit. I was like, hey, I found this apartment. It was above I think a veterinarian. And I was like, oh my God, this would be great. And I love dogs. I want to see the animals. This would be fine because I'll be out most of the day anyway. So even if, there are noisy animals there during the day, it's not going to matter because I'll only be there, in the evening and the night when the place is closed. And then literally the first place that I applied to go see, they're like, yeah, no foreigners. Now they didn't say no foreigners. Here's what they did. What they did was say, okay, only people with Japanese citizenship. Oh, getting ahead of myself there. Only people with Japanese citizenship and permanent residence. Now, this may as well have been saying no foreigners because to get permanent residency in Japan, I think you have to be the spouse of a Japanese national. You have to be there's some weird, if you're the son of a Japanese national, but you want to, maintain your foreign citizenship, something like that, if you're related to a Japanese national somehow. Or if you're an immigrant like I was, you have to have been in Japan for 10 years, as well as have a permanent job. Now, I was on that path. I think, by the time I even left Japan, I think it would have been, 7.5, 8 years at that point. And so I didn't have permanent residency, but you have to figure the amount of foreigners, the amount of non-Japanese with permanent residency status in Japan is, I would literally say less than 1%. So when you're told that, only permanent residents, only Japanese nationals, you may as well be saying no gaijin. So what I had found was I was locked out of a lot of the apartments that I wanted in Japan or in the Tokyo area. And this is really the first time I'd ever really experienced that because on my first job here in Japan, my first job was with the JET program, so your apartment's taken care of. I had assistance from the previous organization I was working with, the university. They helped me out in finding a place at least. But the issue I faced when I moved to Tokyo was I guess just in the broad strokes. And this was true not just in terms of finding an apartment, it was true in my sort of regular interactions with people, not necessarily on the job, but just in sort of my daily life, was I had never felt more like a foreigner in the 7.5 years that I lived in Japan than I did when I moved to Tokyo, which is to me just super ironic considering Tokyo is supposed to be this world city, global city, full of diversity. And just my experience was complete. What? Oh. Okay, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Siri. Yeah, it makes you think, oh, actually, does Apple have any interest in this? Probably not. So, where even was I? Yeah, so I just felt really out of place. And this is coming at a time when, I'm getting older, starting to think, yeah, what if I do, want to have a family here? And that's something I've been really even, especially in the last 5 years. Like, once you get into your later 20s, it's not just when you turn 30, it's even in your later 20s. You're thinking, okay, now's the time for life to begin. And even in my earlier years in Japan, I figured if I wanted to have a family, I probably wouldn't do it. I wouldn't create or make that family in Japan because I've experienced the Japanese school system firsthand as a teacher. And it just is not something I would really want to subject my kid to, which would mean I would need to somehow afford an international school. And it would have been super hard to have found a job where I would have made enough money to be able to spend tens of thousands of dollars a year to send my kid or kids to an international school. So that was going to be particularly hard. And I was lucky to get as far as I did. And so I'm really grateful for that. And I'm really sort of proud of myself for getting that far, putting in that work. But I think what had happened was I had just started to come to realize that I just didn't want to be in Japan anymore because being there didn't fit with my life goals. I had my grandfather, he's starting to get into his mid-90s. He's getting very old. I see my parents, they're getting older. I wanted to spend more time with my family. My sister is on her second kid. When you have that stuff, and it'll happen to most, if not all of you. And some people, I had a lot of friends who they ended up staying in Japan. They ended up staying there. They either made families there or they just really enjoyed being there. So I'm not like it's every person is going to have a different situation. You're going to have different desires. You're going to have different wants. You're going to have different goals. It's just that for me, as much as I love Japan, as much as I really want to go back there, as much as I miss it, I think what's side? I think what ultimately happened for me was just that being in Japan did not match with my life goals. And so that's why I ended up having to leave. Now, there was sort of that's all the backdrop. And then you had the immediate, it was I think, inevitable that I was going to leave Japan. Now, the reason I left Japan at the exact time I did, and which was really, really bad timing, because I sort of set up the plan to leave Japan sort of at the beginning of 2020. I didn't know that the world was going to be on fire in a couple of months, but I ended up deciding to stay the course because I just had some other family things happen, particularly with my new relationship that forced a change. And while maybe I think there's a part of me that wishes I could have stayed a little bit longer, the cards went onto the table and the chips, whatever poker reference you want to put in, I just had to. I was dealt a hand, and that's what I played with. Oh, Metroid 2. I bought this like 3 years ago. I remember. So now that I sort of told you why I left Japan, maybe I can give you. There's been actually a bunch of times where I thought I might have left Japan. I was on the JET program for 5 years. And so another thing I keep on saying is like 5 years. So Japan has this thing where if you're in a sort of contract position, if you're not a full employee of the organization, the company that you're with, you've got a 5-year clock on being with that organization, because after 5 years, by law, a company or a thing or whatever, the group has to make you a full employee. Now, they will very rarely ever do that. And so that's really why I was looking for permanent positions in Tokyo. And even though I got what I wanted, but I was, actually, yeah, maybe I can go a little bit deeper because there's not just the family stuff. It wasn't just the family stuff that was really making me rethink my decision to be in Japan. I think it was also, and I don't mean this specifically about my employer, but this is generally true of lots of companies in Japan. And it's just that the working conditions are, to say, I don't want to say like not great. I don't want to say they're pretty bad, but if you're coming to Japan with a foreign mindset, it's gonna take some adjustment, and it might not be an adjustment that you will want to make. So what I mean is that, so I went from a job where, I was just working 9 to 5. I could get home by 6 o'clock. I could make dinner real easy. And I found myself, I actually had energy to do things. But then when I got the job in Tokyo, I had a car before at my previous work. I bought my own personal car, and so I was able to go on trips. I didn't have any problem with the commute. I just lived like a 15-minute drive from the university that I worked at, even though it was up on a giant mountain. It's really annoying that way. But then when I moved to Yokohama, when I moved to Tokyo to work, I had to get rid of my car, and then I had to take the train. And when I thought taking the train, I was like, yes, I freaking love trains. This is going to be amazing. This is my dream of commuting to work by train. I'm not going to have to worry about driving. If it rains, it'll be fine. Well, the problem was that the apartment that I did end up getting was really old, and I had to go into this sort of almost public housing system that I felt like, okay, I just want an apartment that's not going to reject me. And so I went with this public housing system. Shout out to them. While the apartments are old, they are relatively cheap, easy to move into, and they won't be racist against you. So that's all points in their favor. The only downside is there's basically no insulation. Like when the winter hit, like, oh my God, I was just so cold all the time. It was really, really miserable living there. There was no fan in the shower, so it was just like a swamp in there. The apartment itself was honestly, when you're supposed to be working for a large Japanese company in a managerial role, it's not really the place you would expect. That and the stresses of the job, they were really getting to me. And then I really, if you want to conclude the video here, the reason I left Japan is because I ended up just being in what I felt was the worst position, or like the worst life part. How do I even describe that? My quality of life was the worst it had ever been in Japan, because the commute had turned from 15 minutes into, I want to say, about an hour and a half, with half an hour on the train, which was really, really stressful for me. I did not enjoy being cramped. Like, I would take the train at, oh man, what time did I end? Like 6:45 in the morning, so that I could get in early to work. And boy, I was just so miserable, because you're packed in there for half an hour. You're standing up the whole time. If you can tolerate that, then Japan is the place for you. But I ended up just not being able to do that. I ended up actually being able to work from home most of the time in the last couple of months because of Corona. And that, man, my feeling about Japan and everything really went up at that point. But for the first few months, I was absolutely miserable. The pay was not great, and that's what you'll find in a lot of places, and not just the big companies, but the smaller companies as well. You're not really going to be paid as much. I remember as I was leaving, one of my bosses he was a British guy, and I was discussing with him what do I do once I get out of Japan, because he had experience working all over the place, and he was like, well, just you'll find some work, and to be honest, like you'll get paid a lot more doing the same thing than what I was getting paid in Japan. So you had that factor, you had the racism, and just it was great. Like Monday to Friday was absolutely miserable, because you're commuting in. I was super stressed out at work with what I was doing. But Saturdays, oh my God. Saturdays, I cannot even describe to you what it's like spending a Saturday in Tokyo. It is, if you have a minute, like, I'm sure some of you watching this video right now, you visited Japan. It's like, if you visited Tokyo, there's nothing like it. It's absolutely incredible. Just being able, and it's not just going to the retro shops. It's not just being half an hour away from Trader. It's not just, being able to pop in a Super Potato, after work or even during lunch. I actually did go to Akihabara a couple times on my lunch break just to see if I could do it. But on Saturdays, when you can go to Shibuya, when you can go to Nakano, when you can walk, like my office was quite near Tokyo Tower. Had a really great view out of it, but just being there on the weekends, and I mean Saturday very specifically because on Sunday I was filled with existential dread. But on Saturday, when you go and you meet up with friends at these just insane restaurants, not that they're expensive, but just regular Japanese restaurants. Maybe a little bit pricey. You're paying $10 for a sandwich, I guess, but for one of the best sandwiches you'll ever have in your entire life. And for some people, being in Tokyo and going through all that stress, either, the stress doesn't bother them or they adapt better than I did. If you're in college or you're in your mid-20s and you want to get a job in Japan, I'd absolutely recommend it for a couple of years. I may be looking back on it. I don't know if I want to say I spent too much time in Japan. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I don't know. That's just life. I don't exactly mind how things played out. But I would absolutely recommend going to Japan either to teach English if you have some other expertise and a Japanese company offers you a job. I would do it. If I could go back and change anything, I would maybe just change. I would probably change how I moved to Tokyo. I'd change how I moved to Yokohama. I'd probably get a place closer to work, and I'd probably be a little bit more mindful of the hoops that I would have to jump through. Being a foreigner trying to live in Tokyo. But I wouldn't have changed the major decisions, I suppose. And so with that and this copy of Dracula XX, probably the hardest Castlevania game that I've played yet, although I still have to play the Game Boy Advance ones. We'll see if those are any more or less difficult. I'm going to assume less because, man, was this game really, really hard. I hope I was able to give you guys some insight on what it's like living in Japan and on my decisions to leave. I could, if you want to know anything more about living in Japan specifically, about working in Japan, about just being a foreigner in Japan, just ask me. I would love to make videos about that specifically. We can do the same thing where I go through some of the video games that I brought with me, just that you don't have to stare at my face for 20 minutes. But otherwise, I think I'm just going to cut it off here because I think I've been pretty personal with this one. So again, leave me a comment if you want to know anything more. You want me to go deeper anywhere? Yeah, okay. Now I'm just rambling. So I'm going to end it here. I've been your man out of Japan, Jake Contra, saying thanks for watching. See you next time. And mahalo.